Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Creative Piecemeal. Today, I am joined by the talented David Libert. He is more than a musician and manager. He's a talented, hardworking household name who has worked with many artists along his unique journey, from a kid in Jersey playing piano to being a bandmate and beyond. And you can now read about his epic ride in his new book, Rock and Roll Warrior: My Misadventures with Alice Cooper, Prince, George Clinton, Living Color, The Happenings, and more. It was released last month in September, and so it is available everywhere you get your books. I've actually had the wonderful pleasure of diving into it myself, and it's absolutely fascinating to see that, to read that different type of world from the 60s and forwards in the music business. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I usually open the show with like who or what inspired someone to become a musician, but your book explains that in rather detail. So instead, I'd like to open with, what would you do if you weren't a musician?
I have no idea. I never really wanted to be anything else but when I was younger. I think my second choice might have been architect. I was sort of fascinated with arenas and stadiums. So I suppose if I failed at being a musician, maybe I would have ventured into designing arenas and stadiums, places that I found myself in over the course of my musical career with myself and other artists. Irony, I suppose.
That sounds like it'd be fun, and it's, creative in a different way. Your book just recently came out. What sort of prompted you to decide to write that?
Well, over the years, lots of friends of mine said, David, you've lived such an interesting life. You have such great stories. You should really write a book. I never really thought seriously about it, but eventually my girlfriend said, you know what, maybe they're right. Maybe you should write a book. I think you have a life worth sharing with other people. So that's what prompted me to give it some serious thought. And that was the encouragement, I suppose. I needed the incentive to actually do it. It's a lot of work. I never realized what an overwhelming endeavor it really is to get a book together. But I did. It took a while, and here we are, talking about it on your show.
I know, that must be pretty surreal, putting your life into a book.
It is strange, I guess. Certainly when I was living my life, I didn't really think that much of it. I suppose that, this is pretty cool. But living it day to day, you don't really put all of it together as as a memoir or a journal of sorts. You're just living it every day. Looking back on it now, I suppose, this is pretty cool. I'm glad I did this. I guess I did live a kind of cool life. Not a bad life now either, but I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, there's definitely some really interesting stories in there. I haven't gotten to all of them yet, but what I've read so far is definitely not a typical life, I would say. You get to tour with artists, you get to meet fascinating people. You're writing songs, you're touring the country, you're in a band, you do lots of really, really interesting things that, only a certain set of the population really gets to, because it takes a lot of hard work to even reach that upper echelon of being a touring musician to begin with.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's a labor of love as well. It's not like it's a miserable life where we're having a pretty damn good time while all this is going on. It's a lot of fun, a lot of hard work, and a lot of fun.
Where was one of your favorite places to travel to?
I've been to a few. With the happenings, I would have to say it was probably Newfoundland. That was a very interesting place. It's sort of its own environment, sort of disconnected to the rest of the world, but not really. It's sort of a modern place. That was interesting. We did a couple of shows there. Recently, when I say recently, I mean several years ago, I was in Senegal in Africa. That was fascinating because it was a real close-up look at a third world country. And I think that when you go to places that are different from your normal environment, it's a real learning experience. And I've just traveled all over the world. I like New Zealand. I like Japan, of course, Australia. I spent a lot of time in Germany because if you're going to do European tours, you do a lot of dates in Germany because they have the facilities there to accommodate a tour.
I'm always curious about when people travel, the food. Is there any kind of a dish or a meal that you absolutely loved and wish you could have all the time over here?
Well, I am a foodie. Italian food was pretty spectacular. The food in Brazil, I like. Their meats are just fantastic. Their coffee, Brazilian coffee, is like the best coffee in the world. Makes our coffee look like mud.
Jumping back to a music question, you grew up playing piano and then later you dabbled and picked up electric bass. But is there any other instrument that you haven't tried that you'd like to?
Well, I wasn't very good at other instruments. I was a natural born bass player. I didn't realize that until after many years of playing keyboards and piano, ended up picking up a bass and a little amp. And after a couple of weeks of fooling around with that, I realized that was my instrument. And actually, I could never hope to play the piano as well as I would eventually be able to play the bass. I found my true instrument. I fooled around with drums, wasn't very good at it. Play a little bit of guitar. I'm not very good at it. I think basically keyboards and bass is what I do. I tried a couple of wind instruments, just playing around to see what it was like. Nothing really stirred my creative juices like bass and keyboards, and the other instruments I simply never was able to be good enough to develop any decent chops.
I think it's interesting. I feel like creative people, they sort of gravitate towards a few instruments, almost like they've found a soulmate in an instrument, whether they picked it up early or later in life. They just sort of know, like, oh, that's the one.
I believe that's true. I certainly found that to be the case. It just, I guess the bass was just the right instrument for me. A guitar could play a chord, and you have a choice as a bass player to play any one of several different bass notes to go with that chord. And you have the ability by playing that one bass note to change that chord. You can change it to a minor when the guy's playing, a major chord or some kind. If you know what you're doing on bass, it's a lot of fun, and it's also percussive, so it's also satisfied that rhythmic need as well. It's a great instrument. I just, was fortunate enough to figure out early enough in life what my real instrument was. And of course, I still play keyboards, always will. And to this day, I sit down at the piano here at the house 3-4 times a week and enjoy that. And I suppose I always will.
That brings us really nicely to our next question, which is, what is your favorite and least favorite parts of the creative process?
Well, there's a lot of different aspects. There's songwriting, there's arranging. I guess my forte, if arguably I have one real great talent, it is vocal arranging. which was something that I had been fascinated with since the beginning of all of this. I used to listen to doo-wop groups when I grew up. I used to listen to this WADO, I think it was, in Newark, New Jersey. And they played all of these doo-wop bands, the Paragons, the Jesters. Found myself hanging out on street corners with some of my singing buddies, and we would harmonize singing these doo-wop songs. And then when I got a little older, I started to listen to more sophisticated groups like, of course, the Four Seasons and the Beach Boys, but also the Four Freshmen, the High Lows, the Double Six of Paris, Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. These were very sophisticated harmonizing bands, and I marveled at their harmonic structures of these groups, and I think had a great influence on the way that I developed my sense of vocal arranging, which is reflective in all of the Happenings hits. I was the vocal arranger, and I think it was all reflected in all of those songs that we did. My vocal arranging style, which gave the Happenings their style, I suppose. What did I hate? What did I hate the most? I wasn't crazy about sitting around all day in a recording studio to get to sing shortly, because there was so much else going on that I really wasn't involved in. So I guess it's the same thing as shooting a movie. You sit around all day to shoot one or two scenes. I wasn't crazy about that, but small price to pay for success.
You talked about vocal arranging and harmonies, and doo-wop is just amazing. It's something that I really have always loved, doo-wop. But I'm curious, does that mean you also like the really old school, like Bach and Mozart, and the way they do their choral arrangements?
I never think I acquired a great appreciation for that. I took 8 years of classical lessons. It seemed more like schoolwork than music to me.
Yeah.
What I did start to get into towards the end of those 8 years, and I suppose it's a form of classic, was like I learned Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin on the piano, An American in Paris. Those are sort of jazz, but that would be the classical music of the day. That I was very much tuned into and really enjoyed that.
You've led a really illustrious and varied career. What is one of your favorite things about your career that stands out?
I spent a great deal of it on the road with either Alice Cooper, Rare Earth, somewhat with George Clinton in Parliament Funkadelic. I love the camaraderie, hanging out with the people in the entourage, doing all these kinds of things together, going from city to city and meeting people. It was, listen, you live in a little bubble when you're on the road, an almost impenetrable bubble to people looking in from the outside. You sort of live in your own little world, so you can design and shape that world, to suit yourself. With Alice Cooper, it was just one big party. I mean, everybody bent over backwards to have a really good time. You had to be a really good sport on an Alice Cooper tour, because the pranks and the shenanigans and that kind of thing was nonstop, and everybody participated. You had to be a good sport to be on an Alice Cooper tour, and no one was immune. I mean, Alice was a subject of that kind of, I wouldn't call it abuse, but just, being a good sport, being picked on. Everybody picked on everybody up, but in a loving, friendly way that everybody can enjoy it. But you had to have a pretty thick skin.
What is a piece of music advice or life advice that you ignore, and one that you always follow?
Well, I suppose you have to keep an ear to the ground as to what is the popular trend in music. But the bottom line is, you have to be true to yourself. You have to like what it is that you're doing creatively, and cross your fingers and hope other people will agree with you. But I think in the end, you really have to be true to yourself. You have to, don't do it for other people, do it for yourself. If you're lucky, they'll like it too.
Very true. Excellent advice on that. Is there any advice that you just throw away, you ignore completely?
Well, it's if you want to be a successful musician, it's very hard to avoid the pitfalls of what goes along with trying to get there. It's a complicated business. It's very hard to understand the infrastructure, which is constantly changing as time goes on. Try to find somebody that can help you avoid those pitfalls and has the same vision that you do of what you want your future to look like, who you want to appeal to, and what do you have to do to achieve that goal. Get a good manager. Get somebody that knows what the hell they're doing, has faith in you, believes in you, and take it from there.
What do you think was one of your biggest barriers to reaching the high point of your career, which obviously you've overcome a variety of barriers and you've done a variety of things, but is there any one that stands out?
Being a musician, I think that being in the business and after that, you first of all have to recognize those barriers so you can overcome them or try to overcome them. And that goes back to all the pitfalls that I was talking about. It's awfully difficult for a creative person to recognize, should I go this way? Should I go that way? Should I take this path instead of that path? Those are crucial crossroads. And you could be the most talented person in the world and make a couple of mistakes, and that's the end of your career. How do you overcome those barriers? You either have to understand how it all works or get somebody on your side that can help you understand how it all works and try to recognize what those barriers are and be very methodical in what you have to do to get past that barrier. You can't leave it all up to chance. I mean, there's a lot of luck involved, obviously, but if you know what you're doing and you can figure some things out, your luck seems to become much, much better in terms of what your odds are in making it.
What's next for you?
I'm never going to write another book. It's funny. Everybody asks me, why don't you write another book? You write another book. No. I moved from LA to out here in the California high desert, right here by Joshua Tree. I'm living a life of leisure. I'm living comfortably. I've become an animal rights activist, and I rescue dogs. I have 3 of them. That's why I closed the door back there so they didn't come running in here and disrupt the podcast. I'm enjoying a life of leisure now. I've worked so hard all my life. And it's funny because I keep getting phone calls and emails and letters asking me to do this, do that. Can I manage them? What do you think of this song? Can I hire you to be a consultant? Can I pick your brain? I get all of these offers. I'm just inundated with them. And I turn almost everything down. I'm almost 80 years old now. I know I only look 19, but I'm just kidding. I'm ready to relax and enjoy life. I do a lot of reading. I hang out with my dogs and my girlfriend. I mentioned I play the piano a few times a week. Living out here suits my present lifestyle. And I guess I should count my blessings with all the ups and downs in my life. And let's face it, with all the ups, there were a few downs too, which people can read in my book. Somehow or other, I landed on my feet. So I've really been blessed. I've been fortunate. And now I just want to enjoy the rest of my life, taking it easy.
Yeah, and definitely well-deserved to be able to put your feet up, play piano, hang out with your family and your pups. What kind of dogs do you have?
I've had dogs all my life. As a matter of fact, there's a chapter in the book about Dolly the dog, the world's most famous beagle. I say that because she actually earned her own gold record. And I think that's, she may be the only dog that ever did. I started rescuing dogs. I have 3 dogs Harold, who is a big deaf. He's a deaf 90-pound Dorgo Argentino, I guess is the breed, which is sort of like a pit bull, but bigger. And instead of being barrel shaped, more streamlined. And then I have another dog that I got so he could have a big playmate to roughhouse with it. And boy, do they ever. They're like brothers. And Barney is, if I was going to guess, half boxer, half pit bull. And then I have a little Chihuahua mix, the little sister of the two big brothers. They all get along great. They have great temperament. They're so good natured. I think they know they got a pretty good life out here. I have a huge fenced in backyard, a big doggy door so they can go in and out at will. The backyard is basically theirs, not mine. It's just a pleasure. And then I work with a couple of rescue organizations and try to find good homes for animals that have been strays or abandoned or abused, or dogs that need fosters and permanent homes. And I derive great pleasure in doing that. The dogs are the best of things this world has to offer. And for that reason alone, they deserve the very best that we can give them. So the pleasure I get from the 3 dogs that I have is immeasurable. I just love having them around. It's like family.
Yeah, that's wonderful that you do that rescue work. And as a dog lover, I definitely appreciate that you do that. We'll have to share some links in the show notes for various dog rescues that are near and dear to both our hearts that people can donate to. What is a common stereotype about being a musician that you hope your work has maybe broken or tried to break?
I think more of that in my case was on the business end. Working with Parliament Funkadelic and George Clinton was an interesting experience, to say the least, which is probably why I don't have any hair on my head these days. George was the first Black artist who catered to a sort of new generation of Black kids. I think the secret to George's success was, this is in the mid to late 70s. Most white people, I suppose, didn't realize that there was a burgeoning new class of African Americans who were not middle class, upper middle class, doctors, lawyers, accountants, entrepreneurs, politicians, and their kids, their teenagers, their college age kids needed, for their culture, a music to embrace. They really didn't relate all that well to what their parents were listening to, R&B music, and they didn't relate all that well to groups like Alice Cooper or Led Zeppelin. They needed a music they could call their own, and that's where George stepped in. He recognized that they needed a music that was funky, that addressed their generational concerns like sex, drugs, partying, statements that make my funk the P-funk. I want my funk uncut. Free your ass and your mind will follow. And that's what George gave him. It was druggier, funkier, loud guitar solos, a booming bass that could shake a building apart. That's the music that this young generation of African American kids made their own. And what I learned from that was it gave me a new perspective on that whole issue. So I bent over backwards to make sure that most of George's roadies were Black, and that was kind of difficult because not very many of them had a lot of experience. So you had to give them the experience and get them into it. So I was proud of that. We developed a whole slew of young Black road crews for George and for Bootsy. I also managed Bootsy's rubber band, and I'm very proud of that. Developed a whole bunch of Black promoters as well to promote George and Bootsy shows. First of all, I think they had a better feel for how to promote and market shows that cater to an audience of young teenage and college age Black kids. It was great. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. It was very rewarding.
I bet. I bet. And you obviously have such a wide taste of music that you love and enjoy, but are there any groups that you're excited about nowadays? Do you find yourself sort of gravitating towards your albums from a long time ago?
I do gravitate. There's some new music I like. I like Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. I think they're terrific. I like some country. I never thought I would ever like country back in the 70s, but there's some stuff I really do like. I'm not crazy about most of the music today. There's something about it that maybe I'm just too old to relate to it. But music is constantly changing. It caters to whatever the current crowd is into. And when you're younger, you can sort of zip along with the changes. When you get older, I guess you don't zip along all that well. I do have the opportunity to listen to new music because what happens today is kids don't buy CDs anymore. I mean, why would they? For $10 a month, they can subscribe to either Amazon Music or Apple Music and ask Siri or Alexa to play virtually anything that was ever recorded, any song, any artist, any album, any genre, and instantly listen to it on their car radio or on their stereo at home. Under those circumstances, why would anybody buy a CD? They got everything ever recorded at their fingertips. The algorithm decides what else you should hear. So you end up listening to songs you never heard before as well. I like that. So I'm not really adverse to this new universe of how to listen to music. I kind of dig it.
Yeah, there's definitely some amazing pros, but also some cons with that. Like it's wonderful to sort of have almost the world's catalog at your fingertips. But there's also cons because you don't get that excitement of rushing out to the store on like release day to get that album in your hands. Like kids these days are not going to be able to experience that, opening the booklets and things like that.
Well, they're not like us. They have their own lifestyle. They have their own culture. Maybe that's not important to them. Maybe other things are more important to them. We were into owning things. We built huge album collections. It was sort of our identity. It sort of told people who we were. Kids don't do that today. They don't own cars. They take Uber. They don't own music. They just ask Siri for it. Different world.
Yes, yes. It's definitely kind of hard to wrap my brain around it because I still buy CDs. I definitely do, especially artists that I absolutely love. It's like I can't not have a physical copy of it.
Well, you're a dying breed of people that feel that way. I
Apparently,
mean,
exactly.
I kind of feel that way, but truthfully, I can't remember the last time I bought an album. And you can't even download stuff. For a while there, oh, I like that song. I think I'll go to Apple Music and download it. Downloads are non-existent now.
So your book was released about a month ago, and I'm sure it was kind of hard to try and figure out which memories and stories to put in there. Is there a favorite memory or funny story that didn't make it into your book that you'd be willing to share with us today?
Not that I'd be willing to share. I wanted to be really careful with the book. I did not want it to be a salacious tell-all rock and roll book. I wanted it to be more interesting, more informative, humorous. There were things that I left out because I felt it was either throwing somebody under the bus or just a little too private to reveal not so much my privacy, but the other person's privacy. Otherwise, it all ended up in the book. We'll leave it at that.
A very diplomatic answer. I love that.
Thank you. Maybe I should run for office.
There you go. What is something you wish you had known when you first started on your creative journey?
I wish I had explored other avenues of creativity. I think I missed the boat on a few things. It turns out that most of my favorite bands' music is based on blues, like the Rolling Stones or even Led Zeppelin. Or I would have, had I figured that out early enough, I think perhaps the Happenings would have been more blues based. I would have liked that in retrospect. That would have been pretty cool. I would have liked to have explored producing more. I think that in the end, I didn't recognize until very late in my career that I had a talent for doing that. That would have been nice. Sorry, I didn't pursue that with more vigor. I did do some producing, and that's when I realized I may have missed an avenue by not really pursuing that with more vigor.
If you could have dinner with any creative person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Well, that's an interesting question, Tammy. Gee, I've had dinner with so many people.
I know, that's what makes it tough.
Yeah, maybe Taylor Swift, and I say that because she's one of the few people who figured everything out business wise. You know, she runs her own show. I mean, she's the boss.
I know, she's amazing.
It would be very interesting to talk to her about her view of everything, her perspective, because I think it is unique. And she seemed to have avoided pretty much every pitfall that everyone else seems to be subjected to. That'd be a nice dinner.
Yeah.
Also, I'd look pretty cool hanging out with such a hot chick.
There you go. There you go. I agree. She's definitely one of those people who, as you've said, avoids pitfalls, and you don't see that too often in the creative industry when people reach a certain level of success and fame for them to sort of do what she's done.
That's why she's so unique. She figured it out. She actually figured it all out. And also, she's a free thinker. You know, I like her liberal political leanings because that's sort of the way I lean. And she stands up to things that she really doesn't have to bother, but she does anyway.
What does living a creative life mean to you?
I think life and creativity are two separate things. The people that I admire most in the creative world of music are those people who don't take themselves too seriously. They take life more seriously than. That's one of the things I loved about Alice Cooper. He never took himself seriously for one instant. He took what he did seriously. You know, that's how he made his living. But he just wanted to be one of the guys. He wanted to leave, at least now, a normal life. He wanted to think like normal people. He wanted to live like normal people. And I think he accomplished that. He's been married for 43 years. He's got kids. He's got grandkids. He plays golf. He's got his own radio show. Most creative people take themselves far too seriously. They think there's something really special, and they're really not. They're just have been blessed with, a unique talent. That doesn't make you a great person. It really doesn't make you something special. It just makes you fortunate that you possess that talent. The life you live and the music you create, I think, are two different things. And if you're a successful musician, you find yourself on this highway of success where you are very, very tempted or even forced to live your life a certain way. And to some extent you do. I mean, if you're touring, you got to live in hotels on the road, and you're always surrounded by people that you work with, and those things you can't help. But what about all those other things, the normal things? You sort of have to bend over backwards. You really have to make an effort to do that. Most musicians don't. They just get wrapped up in their own success.
Yeah, so it's important to stay grounded.
Absolutely. I'll tell you this story. When the Happenings first started achieving success, we had the biggest record in the country, See You in September. And we're on this tour with several other bands, and we're playing in front of 15, 20,000 people a night on this tour. Lou Christie was on this tour, and he saw me sitting at the counter one morning at breakfast at this hotel that the tour was staying at. And he sat down next to me and said, I noticed you and the boys seem to be a little confused about some things. And yeah, he was right. It was a bit confusing, a little scary too, because you start to not know who you really are. You start to wonder. And he says, it's real simple, David. Before you started to achieve this measure of success, you and the happenings, nobody thought anything of you. You were nothing. Then you have a big hit record, and now all of a sudden people think you're special. He says, listen, you're still the same nothing that you were before the record. It's just that everyone else now thinks you're something special. Let them. Let them think you're something special. It's good for business. Just don't start thinking it yourself. You're still the same person you were. That was a great big, he says, and if you could, remember that, you'll stay grounded and you'll enjoy the ride. That was a great piece of advice from somebody who had been through it.
Very nice sentiment to end on. David Libert, thank you so much for joining the show. Listeners, please check out his new book, Rock and Roll Warrior, My Misadventures with Alice Cooper, Prince George Clinton, Living Color, The Happenings, and more, which is available wherever you get your books. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.